The county clerk told Clara Wren she had inherited a windmill that no longer turned. Not a farm, not money, not even a house with a roof worth saving. Just a rusted windmill over a dry well on the Oklahoma Panhandle. Her cousins laughed so hard they had to sit down. Then the sky went black, and that useless windmill became the only place in 3 counties where children could still breathe. Her cousins had gotten everything that looked valuable. Harlan Pike inherited Aunt Eliza's farmhouse, the mule team, the smokehouse, and the last 12 acres still holding wheat. His wife Ruth inherited Eliza's silver spoons and the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Clara got the windmill, a dead one. Its blades were bent from years of dust storms. The trough beneath it was cracked. The well under it had gone dry before Clara was born. The tower stood on the far edge of the property like an iron skeleton, humming whenever the wind moved through it. "If you're clever," Harlan said, "you might sell it for scrap." Ruth smiled without warmth. "Or rent it to the jackrabbits." Clara did not answer. She was 27 years old, a dressmender in Amarillo, living in a room behind a laundry where the walls sweated starch and soap. She owned 2 work dresses, a button box, a cracked hand mirror, and a pair of gloves she kept repairing because she could not afford another pair. She had not seen Aunt Eliza in 4 years. Not since the older woman had pressed a parcel of dried peaches into her hands and whispered, "A woman should always know where the food is." Now Eliza was gone, and Clara had been given a windmill nobody wanted. The tower stood a half-mile west of the farmhouse, beyond the hog pen, beyond the collapsed chicken run, out where the land flattened into a pale brown sheet. When Clara walked to it the first evening, the sun was low and red behind a veil of dust. The air tasted like flour and pennies. Grasshoppers snapped under her shoes. The windmill did look worthless. One blade hung loose. Another had folded like a torn spoon. The wooden platform was gray and splintered. The pump handle was missing. The trough had collected nothing but sand, feathers, and the bleached skull of a calf. Clara placed one hand on the tower leg. The iron was warm. Not sun-warm. Alive warm. She frowned and crouched beside the old concrete pad. Dust had drifted thick into every crack, but near the base of the tower, one patch was clean. Too clean. 4 bolts held down a square of metal that looked like part of the foundation, and one of those bolts had a black ring of fresh grease around it. Aunt Eliza had been 78. Her hands had trembled at the end, but someone had been oiling that bolt. Clara worked it loose with a wrench she found in the trough. The square plate lifted. Beneath it was not dirt. It was a ladder. Cool air rose from the dark, carrying the smell of limestone, burlap, and stored grain. Clara stood very still. Then she climbed down. The ladder descended into a chamber cut beneath the windmill pad, wider than the tower above and far deeper than the dead well anyone remembered. Her lantern showed brick walls sealed with lime, a packed earth floor covered in reed mats, and a ceiling braced with cedar beams. Along one wall stood blue barrels sealed with waxed canvas. Along another were shelves of jars wrapped in paper and tied with string. There was water. Not a puddle. Not a miracle. A cistern. Aunt Eliza had built a rain catchment through the windmill frame, running every storm into sand and charcoal filters hidden inside the tower legs. The well was dry, yes, but the windmill had not been pumping from the ground for years. It had been catching the sky. Barrels held clean water. Others held wheat berries, cornmeal, beans, salt, dried onions, sorghum, and coffee. There were sacks of seed. There were quilts, oilcloth, candles, lamp oil, lye soap, quinine, meal packets, and folded strips of muslin for breathing through dust. In the corner stood a narrow cot and a crate of school books, each one stamped with Eliza's name from the years when she had taught children in a one-room schoolhouse before the drought made even school feel like a luxury. On a nail by the ladder hung a letter. Clara knew the handwriting before she opened it. "Clara," it said, "they will call this a dead windmill because they only know how to look at the part above ground. Let them look. The Panhandle is going to ask harder questions than pride can answer. There is water here, and food, and air if the filters are kept wet. I stored enough for more than one woman because hunger never comes alone. Do not tell Harlan until he has learned the shape of meat. He would sell the iron and call himself practical. Use what I left you when the sky turns against the living. Your Aunt Eliza, who remembered you." Clara read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her pocket. That night, Harlan asked if she had found a buyer. Clara said, "Not yet." He laughed again. For the next 6 weeks, Clara became invisible in the way poor women often do when people assume they have nothing worth watching. She moved her trunk from Amarillo into the small shed near the windmill. Ruth said it was generous to let her sleep there until she came to her senses. Harlan said she would be gone by harvest. Clara thanked them, and worked after dark. She cleaned the sand filters. She replaced rotten burlap with fresh cloth. She patched the tower seams with tar. She fixed the vane enough that the wheel would turn in a hard wind, not to pump water, but to pull air through a hidden shaft and down into the chamber. Aunt Eliza had built the system like a woman who had spent decades watching weather punish fools. When the wind blew, the tower breathed. Clara learned the sound of it. A low pull in the pipe, a sigh through wet cloth, a whisper underground. She carried in black walnuts from the creek bed, prickly pear fruit, a sack of flour she bought with money from mending Ruth's curtains, and 2 jars of molasses traded from a traveling peddler. She trapped jackrabbits and smoked the meat in a pit so shallow nobody saw the smoke after dusk. She filled extra jugs every time a rare cloud broke and rain hammered the tower for 10 furious minutes before the dust swallowed the smell of it. People kept laughing. At church, Ruth told the other women Clara was keeping house with a windmill. At the grain elevator, Harlan said Eliza had gone soft in the head before she died. And in town, men spoke of the drought in the same tired arithmetic. How many acres failed? How many cows sold? How many families left for California with mattresses tied to truck beds? Nobody said panic. They did not have to. It was there in every flour sack folded twice, and every child coughing dust into a handkerchief. By November, the wheat was gone. By December, the pump at the Pike farmhouse pulled up water the color of dishwater. By January, the county doctor told mothers to hang wet sheets over windows if they wanted their children to sleep through the night without choking. But there were no wet sheets when there was no water to spare. Then came the storm that made noon disappear. It started on a Sunday afternoon with a brown line on the northern horizon. At first, people thought it was cloud shadow. Then the line grew taller. It climbed until it swallowed the sun. Chickens ran for corners. Horses screamed against their ropes. The air turned electric and still. Clara was at the windmill when she saw it. A wall of dirt rolling toward the farms like a range of mountains on the move. She climbed down into the chamber and soaked every strip of burlap she could reach. She sealed the lower vents. She lit 2 lamps. Then she waited with one hand on Aunt Eliza's letter and the other on the iron bar inside the trapdoor. The storm hit like a freight train made of soil. A windmill screamed. Dust punched through cracks in the shed, through fence boards, through cloth, through prayer. Above ground, the world became a black room. People less than 10 feet apart could not see each other. Cows broke through wire. Windows shattered. The sky dropped into houses and filled cradles, cupboards, lungs. At the Pike farmhouse, Ruth shoved quilts under the doors until her fingers bled. Harlan nailed flour sacks over the windows. Their youngest boy, Matthew, began coughing so hard his lips turned pale. The pump gave out before evening. Not slowed, not sputtered, stopped. At night, there was dust in every cup, dust in every bed, dust in the bread box, dust in the baby's hair. Ruth's silver spoons were packed away in the cedar chest, shining and useless. Harlan came to the windmill before dawn. Clara heard him before she saw him, stumbling against the tower legs, shouting her name into a wind that tore the words apart. She lifted the trapdoor an inch. His face appeared through the dust like a ghost carved from clay. His eyes were red. His hat was gone. A wet rag hung around his neck, already dry and brown. "Clara," he said. "Matthew can't breathe." Behind him stood Ruth with the boy wrapped in a quilt, and behind Ruth, half hidden by the storm, were the Bell sisters from the next farm, their grandmother, a hired hand named Amos, and a widow from the road carrying a baby against her chest. Clara looked at Harlan. She remembered him saying scrap. She remembered Ruth saying jackrabbits. She remembered Aunt Eliza's warning. "Do not tell Harlan until he has learned the shape of mead." Now Need stood in front of her, bent over a coughing child. Clara opened the door. Warm lamplight rose from the ground. One by one, they climbed down. The change struck them before they reached the floor. The air was damp and filtered through wet burlap. It smelled of grain and soap instead of dust. Matthew's coughing eased enough for him to cry, which made Ruth cry too, silently, with both hands over her mouth. Harlan stood at the bottom of the ladder and stared. At the water barrels, at the shelves, at the bags of seed, at the quilts folded in careful stacks. His mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. Clara said, "No one touches the water without asking. No one opens a barrel without me. Children get the first cups, then the sick, then everyone else." No one argued. By morning there were 17 people under the windmill. By the next night, there were 26. The chamber was not large enough to be comfortable, so Clara made it orderly instead. Bedrolls went along the east wall. Food stayed behind the flour sacks. Water stayed sealed until ration time. Wet cloths were hung across the air shaft. Children were given school slates from Eliza's crate and told to draw what they remembered the sky looking like. Outside, the storm kept grinding the county down. Inside, Clara measured grain by the cup and water by the swallow. The hidden system worked for 2 days. On the third, the air changed. It grew heavy, stale. The wheel above had jammed. Without its turning, the shaft no longer pulled air through the wet filters, and every breath in the chamber began to feel borrowed. Clara found Eliza's second note inside the toolbox. "If the wheel locks in a dirt storm," it said, "clear the tail hinge and the north bearing. Do not wait. The room will hold food longer than it will hold air." Harlan read the note over her shoulder. For the first time since Clara had known him, he did not offer advice. He said, "Tell me what to do." So she did. They tied a rope around his waist. Amos braced the ladder. Ruth soaked the last clean muslin and wrapped it around Harlan's nose and mouth. Clara climbed first, because she knew the tower better than anyone living. The storm struck her face with dirt so hard it felt like gravel. She crawled along the platform with a hammer tucked into her belt and one hand gripping iron. The world had no horizon, only sound, only force, only the tower shaking beneath her. She found the tail hinge packed solid with mud dust. She hammered it loose. Harlan reached the bearing and scraped it clean with a knife, while the wind tried to peel him off the tower. Twice the rope went tight. Twice Amos and the others below hauled back. Then the wheel moved. A quarter turn. A groan. Another turn. The hidden shaft began to pull. Down in the chamber, The wet burlap snapped inward as the air started moving again. Children lifted their heads. Lamps steadied. Ruth looked up through the ladder hole and whispered, "It's breathing." Clara and Harlan climbed down coated in dirt from hair to boots. Nobody laughed. They stayed beneath the windmill for 9 days. 9 days of sorghum porridge, bean stew, ration coffee, coughing fits, whispered prayers, and children sleeping in piles like puppies under Eliza's quilts. Clara kept the ledger on a school slate. How many cups of grain? How many cups of water? How many cloths needed soaking? Which child had fever? Which adult was pretending not to? The Bell grandmother told stories when the wind was loudest. Amos repaired a cracked shelf. Ruth, who had once looked at Clara as though poverty were contagious, tore her own petticoat into breathing strips without being asked. Harlan carried waste buckets up the ladder whenever the storm thinned enough to see his own hand. On the 7th night, he sat beside Clara near the water barrels. "I was wrong," he said. Clara was too tired for speeches. "About the windmill?" He shook his head. "About Eliza. About you. About what counts." Clara looked at the barrels, at the wet filters, at the children asleep under quilts, stitched by a woman they had called foolish. "Eliza did not build this to make you ashamed," she said. "She built it because she knew shame would not keep anyone alive." When the storm finally moved on, the world above looked buried. Fence lines vanished. The road was gone. Drifts of dirt leaned against houses like snow. The Pike farmhouse still stood, but the kitchen was ruined, and the well casing was choked. Across the county, barns had collapsed, livestock had suffocated, and families who had trusted walls and luck found both of them too thin. But every person who had climbed under Clara's windmill came out alive. News traveled faster than wagons. People who had mocked the dead tower came to see the cistern. Men from the county board inspected the filters and asked who had designed them. Harlan said, in front of everyone, "Eliza Harrow designed them." Clara Wren kept them working. That spring, the windmill was not sold for scrap. Harlan gave back the strip of land around it without being asked. Ruth returned Eliza's quilts and brought Clara the cedar chest too, saying it had belonged with the person who understood what Eliza had left behind. Clara did not move back to Amarillo. She stayed in the shed, then rebuilt it into a small house. She planted Eliza's seed when the first decent rain came. She taught every family within 5 miles how to make a dust mask, seal a barrel, build a sand filter, and store more than pride. The chamber beneath the windmill became the place people checked before the sky darkened. Years later, when the tower had new blades and children no longer whispered when the wind rose, there was a small sign bolted to the north leg. Eliza Harrow's windmill, water below, air within, for anyone who needs it. And Clara kept the letter in a tin box beside the first ledger. They will call this a dead windmill because they only know how to look at the part above ground. That was Aunt Eliza's true inheritance. Not iron, not land, not a thing that looked useful to people who measured worth too quickly. She had left Clara a way to survive before anyone admitted survival would be needed. And when the sky turned black, the woman with the worthless windmill became the reason the whole road kept breathing. If this story moved you, share it with someone who knows quiet strength when they see it. Subscribe to Winter Whispers for more forgotten stories of resilience, wisdom, and the people who prepared before the storm arrived.